Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. Do someone move to put on the floor, please? The approval of the agenda as presented. Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councilor Pringle. If there's no discussion on the motion, all in favor? It is carried. Declaration of interest. You can declare anytime you see fit during the meeting. We'll move on to the agenda down to public hearings. Madam Clerk, you were going to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to highlight that the agenda prior to commencing this meeting had been amended to remove the formerly advertised public meeting regarding the transfer of Mountain Lake Forest property to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation from the County of Grey. This meeting has not been canceled. It's simply been removed from our public forum, being our committee of the whole. As this is a county settlement, the county wanted to keep it separate from township business. This meeting will still occur this evening at 7 o'clock and can be viewed on the Grey County live stream, being the Grey County YouTube channel, of which a link has been provided in this agenda.
Thank you, Bridgie. Okay, so we'll move on to the agenda. Our presentation, Jennifer Miller, I believe, is she here now? Oh, okay. Jennifer, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me this evening, Mayor Burley and council members. I'm here representing the Reach Center Grey Bruce. We are a local charity that is self-funded, which means that we get no government support, that has been profoundly affected as a result of the pandemic. So I thought I'd start out this evening sharing a little bit about who we are and what we do. So I guess I just say advanced slide. You have the presentation. Is that how we're going to do this? Okay.
That's correct, yes.
Perfect. Okay. So basically our whole focus is on skill acquisition for independence. What independence looks like is different for every single participant based on capacity and interest. We also look at meaningful contribution to community and friendship. So that's sort of the lens of everything that we do. Next slide. The majority of our participants have an intellectual or developmental disability, although we do have some ABI, brain injury, and fetal alcohol syndrome participants. And it's staggering when you look at how many people inside of Grey and Bruce County have an intellectual or developmental disability. So if we look at just the population of Georgian Bluffs, for example, which I think is somewhere between 10 and 11,000, and you look at prevalence rates, that's about 2,305 individuals with a registered disability. If you take out the mental health components, that's 922 people with an intellectual or developmental disability specific to Georgian Bluffs. So over 60%, I think, of your population are working age as well. And the Reach Center is the only facility that provides day programming for these individuals so that caregivers can have work and employment opportunities and sometimes more than one job. Next slide. So our program runs full days, 4 days a week. Currently, we have 38 families that we're serving. Of course, that's been impacted by COVID. Some of our families are doing on-site support. We were one of the first in the province to be vetted and approved by Public Health to allow on-site program delivery. Within 2 weeks of shutdown in March, we had pivoted to remote supports to support families while government-funded agencies closed and continue to be closed. Next slide. The day is sort of broken up into streams of areas of focus: fitness and wellness, nutrition and health, life skills, and creative expressions and art. Next slide. Actually, we can skip over that one. We'll just look at the photos of the participants, which is much more interesting. So there are some of our people doing the fitness and wellness stream. everything from self-regulatory strategies to core strength and conditioning, gross and fine motor skill coordination are all woven through the fabric of that stream, as well as social pragmatics, team skills, all of those things, none of which are intuitive for our population. Next slide. We skip that one and go to the pictures again. So this is health and nutrition. So again, if the lens of everything we do is about independence, a big piece of that is understanding what constitutes a healthy snack or a healthy meal. Prior to COVID, we'd actually go out and get the groceries, bring them back and prepare them, learn how to store them, safe food handling, all of those pieces. Numeracy is woven through the fabric of this stream. So they do calculator math. If they have a budget and they have a friend coming over, they have to figure out how they can afford to feed to also exploring and connecting to community relation. So connecting them with things like OShare is done through particular stream and volunteer to help with food prep there, etc. That's the giving back to the community piece. That's such an integral part of our program model. Next 2 slides, you can skip to life skills. Life skills, again, fabric of life skills is a lot of our social enterprise
Jennifer, if I can just interrupt your
programming,
presentation.
self-advocacy. Yeah.
We're having a lot of difficulty hearing you. You're kind of coming in spotty. So I'm wondering if you can disable your video feed. That way you're not straining your
Absolutely.
internet.
Okay. Better?
So far.
Is that so far? Okay. So this is where we do social enterprise, self-advocacy, look at some entrepreneurial skills, again, with the idea of facilitating support for labor market experience or volunteer opportunities in community, which is the meaningful contribution piece of our mission. We can skip forward 2 slides to creative expressions. This to have a voice and look at opportunities to express themselves. We have a whole group that is called the Artisan Crew within the confines of social enterprise. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Right now we can hear you. Sometimes it is a little bit spotty, but we're with you so far.
Okay. Okay. We can skip over to the next slide. Every day is something special. We have a drama program, music program. We do a lot of partnerships with local artists and organizations and businesses. Next slide. So our social enterprise, again, with the lens to getting labor market experience with transferable skills to support their independence. We do a lot of crews that go out in the community. The shredding crew, for example, if you go to the next slide, I think is the shredding crew. Yes, so we have a partnership with Kiwanis and United Way, where our participants go out to local businesses, pick up shredding, take it over, shred it and dispose of it. The money that they make from this is not part of our operating budget. They get autonomy over what's done with these funds raised and decision-making authority. So sometimes they have to replace a shredder that they blew up. And sometimes they superhero movies, I will say. Next slide. So this was within scope of our nutrition and outreach program. So again, this is helping at our local food bank. Participants go and help prepare meals. We have a partnership with Zayers and Food Rescue to help support our nutrition stream, and volunteering at events to learn labor market experience again. So currently, 21% of REACH families are residing in Georgian Bluffs. Next slide. So the impact of COVID-19. I did touch on some of these things already, but REACH in particular, we serve a very vulnerable population, which has been the least advocated for throughout this pandemic, has had suffered a significant impact on our opportunities for program delivery. So as I said, in March, we shut down. Also, the donated space that we were in previously shut down and continues to remain closed to REACH. Despite this, we did pivot for some remote supports. We reopened in rented space, short-term rented space on July 6th after approval of public health, and we're the first in the province to be allowed to do so for this sector. We've been successfully operating a hybrid model of remote and in-person support since, but we've moved 3 times based on space availability. Come December 17th, when we shut down for the winter break, we don't have a facility as of right now to resume programming in the new year, which is a crisis situation for many of our families who have to work, and as I said, often more than one job. We have, prior to COVID, we had a service rate of 72. Right now, we're sitting at a service rate of 48 per week. Because public health dictates how many people I can safely accommodate due to social spacing in whatever space that we are in at the time. So I have a list of families that want to come additional days that can't, and a growing list of families that need service that I can't support. So next slide. What I'm looking for from Georgian Bluffs. I had the pleasure of connecting with Mayor Burley and heard him again this morning advocating very strongly for Georgian Bluffs with Bill Walker and other local leadership. I talked to him about any availability of potential space in Georgian Bluffs that could work to accommodate the program. And unfortunately, the needs of the program are quite specific, so that's not an option. The other thing we need is financial support for the program's continuity of service and to ensure there's no disruption of service. We going from donated space to having to source our own space, whether it's to acquire or to lease or rent, etc. We were sharing all reusable resources, tables, chairs, plates. We have to procure those things now. So I am hoping that sort of local government will step up. Believe me that I have tried at a ministerial level to advocate for this population. The buck keeps getting passed. This morning was no exception. There are government-funded agencies out there, but sadly, they are not providing programming. I have families that are in continued isolation right now. So these are individuals that can't advocate for themselves that have been in isolation since March and are not permitted to resume on-site programming regardless of the mental and emotional impact of that continued isolation. So it's a pretty extreme situation, and I'm looking for some support. Next slide. Obviously, I'm looking for support, but I'm also looking for a partnership. So I know that communications is a focus for Georgian Bluff, and I know that there's been a sort of an interest in supporting engagement with community. So I'd be happy to reinforce that message and share your logo and your support in all of our networks and communications vehicles. signage in the space, inclusion of your logo at future events and publications, etc. Next slide. So we do have quite a significant sort of level of engagement by community. Not all of these are financial, most of them are not financial supporters, but partner in some capacity. So Zayers, for example, will give us, part of the food rescue will give us gift cards to help us provide a nutritious snack every single day to every single participant. And the ones that are in continued isolation, we've been delivering essential items to them as well. Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, provided us with hygiene kits. So I was able to mobilize my team to make sure that there was shampoo, deodorant, soap, whatever they needed. So various organizations doing various things, but certainly sort of well connected within the community. Any questions, which I think is the next slide. I kind of rapid fire went through because I know everybody's tired at the end of a long day, but.
Jennifer, thank you very much for a great presentation. Does council have any questions of Jennifer at this time? And I can't see Councillor Colburn or.
Just hold on. Why is this not working? Okay, here we go.
Councillor Colburn, do you have any questions for Councillor Thompson?
I do actually. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, but I'm not sure if you do you need a moment to get the system up and running here, or are we good to go?
No, we're good to go now.
Okay. Jennifer, thank you for that presentation. This is an organization that I didn't know a lot about. I just wondered if you could explain to us how your organization differs from the services of community living.
Sure. So we are the only organization in the area that provides day programming. So that is from 8:30 in the morning until 4:30. We're in operation supporting families. So caregivers deliver their adult dependent to us and we look after them for the day so they can work. Community living has some great programs, but it's 1 hour here, 2 hours there. All of their programs for my participants, for example, to take advantage of those would require a personal or developmental support worker to attend with them. If say mom was working, had to go home, pick up Timmy, take him in the afternoon, drop him off, get him settled, 2 hours later, race back, pick him up, take him home, get him settled. She's not going to be gainfully employed for long. So we're the only organization that does that, which is likely why we've been the ones filling the gaps since March. Community living is shut down right now, doing some remote supports, trying to figure out within all of their extra layers of sort of governmental requirements to figure out how to have some semblance of service. But in the interim, this population is the least able to put context on the lack of supports and disruption. We are a fee-for-service agency, so we charge families $65 a day. These families get something called passport funding from government, which is like an allowance for service for the year. So they can take the fees paid to REACH, submit it to Developmental Services Ontario, because they've vetted and improved our program, and then they get reimbursement from them for attending REACH. Community Living also charges families for their programs, and they also charge for a personal or developmental support worker, which is on average about $30 an hour for families. So in order to have 8 hours of opportunity for safe, inclusive learning, that's cost prohibitive. $5,000 a year doesn't go very far. So we are truly accessible. And we get no government funding, which is sort of the other big delineator between us and community living. Does that help? Okay.
Very much so, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Does any other council member have any comments? Carol, I cannot see you, so I'm not sure if you do or not.
Okay, due to technical difficulties, Jennifer, this is your start. But could you tell me, you said 21%, so how many people is that?
So 21% of our families. So that's about 8 families. I think it's between 8 and 10. I literally took all of the postal codes of the families and mapped them. So one of the slides actually had a map plot that showed exactly where each family. We have families that come all the way from Port Elgin, Tobermory, again, because there is nothing else. So yeah, slide, I don't know if you received digitally a copy of the presentation, but slide number 4, Embracing Abilities, actually shows the Grey Bruce service area, and can actually show you point by point each household within Georgian Bluffs, if that helps.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. How many persons from Georgian Bluffs participate?
Jennifer, are you able to answer that, or will I give that?
Yeah. So 21% of our families, so that's between 8 to 10 participants, reside specifically in Georgian Bluffs. Sorry, it's so small. The animated version in PowerPoint enlarges that to make it easier to see, and you can actually click on the little things and they pop up with the postal code, which is how I mapped them. But yeah.
Jennifer,
When you think about unique individuals, you also think about service rate. So the difference is that we might have one participant that comes 1 day a week, and that would be a count and service rate for 1. And we might have somebody in Georgian Bluffs that would have a service rate of 4, which means they come every single day so that mom or dad could work. And so the unique individuals is one variable of consideration, but perhaps at least equitable, if not more important, would be the service rate, which is significant for Georgian Bluffs. Does that help? It's hard to tell with this Zoom business if I'm...
Carol, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, a question from the chair. Your ask from Georgian Bluffs of $30,000. Could you explain that a little bit more to me? How did you come up with that figure?
So basically what that would do would be allow us to continue program delivery with other supporters. So we do have a contribution of support from Bruce County and Grey County at this time, and we're waiting to hear back from other municipal supporters. So I just literally took the total amount that we needed and what was the apportionate population within the catchment area of that municipality and asked. So $30,000 is, believe it or not, 21% of what I need on an annual basis for this program, going from donated space to having to lease, rent, or acquire space, and serve all the families in need. So that's how we arrived at that number. I realize it's a significant number, which is why I thought a monthly contribution would be more manageable. And to give you a sense of context, our fee for service just covered our staffing costs prior to COVID. As a result of COVID, I've had to increase my staffing costs because I have an individual that does all of the COVID protocol enforcement. So we disinfect after every single bathroom use, which the hospital doesn't even does just because of the vulnerability of our population. So staffing costs are up, service rates down because the space is too small. And so I need at least 3,500 square feet, a teaching kitchen, 2 accessible bathrooms, a walking distance for public transportation and for community outreach. It's quite a list, which makes it quite a challenge to find space. So that's how we arrived at the number.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for that. That answered my question. Does the council have any other questions of Jennifer? See none. Cassie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given the dollar amount of the ask, I recommend that we discuss this as part of our 2021 budget deliberations, which next week I was planning on giving an update on. But given the dollar amount, I don't think we make immediate decision on this.
And I agree, Madam President, and that's what I was going to suggest to end our discussion here tonight. Jennifer, I don't see any more questions. It's a great presentation. We do have all that information for us now. We will seriously look at this when we start doing our deliberation for their budget. And I'm quite sure that a staff member will get back to you to tell you what's happening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. So I'll move on with the agenda. Okay, Madam Clerk, to move on.
Yes.
We have no delegations here tonight. We're down to our correspondence. Our first piece of correspondence is the Ministry Infrastructure Investment in Canada Infrastructure Program. Cassie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we received notification that a new grant program has been created, and Georgian Bluffs can receive $100,000. So what we have to do is we can submit one project for this funding. And the funding is really tied to COVID. So things that fall as eligible would be retrofits, repairs, and upgrades to municipal buildings. The other category is retrofits, basically, for municipal buildings because of COVID. So that would be like installing safety things in public sector buildings. Safety measures for physical distancing and rolling stock. The third category, which I think would be of most interest to Georgian Bluffs, is active transportation infrastructure. So that would mean, spending the money on parks and trails, multi-use paths, footpaths and footbridges, active transportation, support facilities, street and park furniture, and playground infrastructure within parks. So in my opinion, that's probably the best place for us to fall. But then there's also the last category is disaster mitigation and adaptation infrastructure. So that's dealing with climate change, floods and fires, and assets associated with reforestation. So I brought this correspondence to council tonight to get some feedback and input. Managers are also thinking about where we could spend this money. One thought that was already given to me was that we use the lands at the administration building and create a trail system with a gazebo. It's been talked about before, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, that would support the active transportation category. That was provided by the mayor as a possibility, and I presented it to staff and they thought that could be realistic. But we have some time to think about this, so I would like all of council to think about it and provide me with your feedback, ideally within the next couple of weeks, so then we can narrow down the projects and make a recommendation to council prior to that December 21st deadline.
Thanks, Cassie. Yes, I did suggest that to Madam Clerk and yourself about this proposed trail using up the land that we have behind the municipal building. I do have a survey of the land here if anybody wants to look at it. it's just something I felt that we could meet accessibility with the trail. We could involve it as the time goes on. It's probably the only time we'd ever get out of funds to be able to do this. And not only could the staff use this trail, but that whole area could use the trail as just a place to go walk, enjoy nature and so on. And I sing about a gazebo down towards the end of it, just a place where a person could go relax, enjoy life itself. And if we went ahead with this, I would not in no way suggest that staff do this. I would suggest that we would hire a professional landscaper to go in and do it upright and quick, and just so the use is there. It could involve a plant of trees and stuff like that, a few benches, just something we could add to as life goes on. It's just something I thought of, I don't know, Councilor Thompson, you probably remember Councilor Gay years ago. She was really onto this topic and really wanted to see it go forward, but at that time there was no way of ever getting any kind of grant to make it come to fruition. And it's just something I thought of, and I just thought it would be a great thing that we could put in place for our municipality, for our staff, and for the surrounding area. Does Mayor Carlton?
You mentioned accessible, so what kind of trail surface are we looking at? Are we looking at something that's like, for when we say accessible, wheelchair accessibility or bicycles, or like what type of thing are we talking about?
The Accessibility Act would come to play. It does not necessarily mean it has to be a hard surface like asphalt or something like that. That's not necessary. A compacted limestone crutch or something like that, something that's fairly hard, which is easy to do, would be acceptable. The width would come into play. Things like if there was a gazebo there and so on, make it handicap accessible, which is quite easy to do. If we wanted benches, they would be accessible, handicap accessible. It's quite easy to do in the startup of a project. Just, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to comment that, whatever we decided to do, if it was tailored to public access on this property, we would propose all of our plans to the Accessibility Committee, what we participate jointly with Grey County.
Yep.
That is required by provincial legislation to have that committee review the plans to ensure that they are fully accessible.
Thank you. I still sit on that committee myself, not have a conflict, but anyway.
I think it's a good question.
Oh, go ahead, Kathy, sorry.
Thank you. No, I think that's a good idea. I am inclined to want to consider other options as well, though. We live fairly close to, our municipal office is fairly close to Owen Sound and other existing trails. So to add some kind of trail park kind of atmosphere where in an area where probably we have access to that already within a fairly short distance, I'm not sure that that's the best way to use the money. We have currently parks that need some attention, and for example, ones that are along shorelines with the erosion and the rush of the waves and the climate change that's impacting those parks along the shorelines. I'm wondering if it would be better to take this money and earmark it for those kinds of projects.
Thank you, Councilor Coburn. The only reason why I suggested this, I was not trying to build another park or refresh the ones we have. I was trying to think of the idea of making a place where our staff, instead of having to go and sit in the parking lot at a picnic table, they would have a place where they could go, have a few minutes by themselves, walk around a bit and so on. And it could easily be done all year round. It doesn't necessarily have to be just in the spring. Go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you. So no decisions are being made tonight. I do ask that if council or even the public have any thoughts, they provide them to myself. I will bring those projects back to staff, and then staff will make a recommendation on which one we will proceed with, and we'll bring that recommendation back to council for approval.
Thank you, Cassie. And now, I'm just, all I'm trying to do is an idea come up with and put it up to council, and please, every council member come up with an idea, put it forward to the clerk, and as Cassie says, they'll look at it, come back with a recommendation. Okay? So if we're done with that, we'll move on with our next piece of correspondence. It's the 2021 Roma Conference. I guess, do we have any delegations we want to put towards the conversation? Or the conference? I haven't heard of any, but and I do not even believe the county level, I don't think we're putting any forward either. Just for information, Bill 218 supporting Ontario Recovery and Municipal Act, Elections Act. Madam Clerk, you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just included this for council's information as there's been a lot of talk about this in the municipal world lately. Your consent agenda next week is full of motions that do not indicate support for the changes that they're presenting. So just briefly to outline what is already in front of you, Bill 218 proposes changes to both liability protection as well as changes to the Municipal Elections Act. My focus generally is on the municipal election portion of it. Specifically, they're removing the option for ranked ballots. They're reverting nomination day back to the second Friday in September from the fourth Friday in July. It changes the timeline for passing the bylaw authorizing alternative voting methods, which we did at a previous meeting. So it gives us more time from May 1st, the year before an election, to May 1st, the year of an election. I mean, even if the changes came into effect, we would require more pre-planning than that, and we would have it done earlier regardless of the requirements. And changes to just retaining voting equipment, similar to alternative voting decisions as well. So I just wanted you to be aware of these discussions and aware of the changes that are being proposed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Council, have any questions? Deputy Mayor Carlton.
Just a question about the change in the nomination period going back to the second Friday in September. So how does that affect us when you've got to get ballots and everything all printed up, ready to go with the type of election we were looking at this time?
So that is really the only change that kind of alarms me a little bit, because even though it's not that much time that we're losing, it is significant when you're preparing for an election. That's the time that we're preparing our ballots, preparing our voter information letters. So it kind of ties our hands a little bit, but if these changes do go through, then we will amend our procedures. But I hope that they don't.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
But that actually takes 6 weeks out of that process where you're trying to get everything ordered and ready and in place.
That's correct.
So that's a really short time frame to have everything in place, ready to be in the mail to go out.
It does, yeah. So really, when you think about it, it's just 6 weeks less time that we have to get information to the public. So when you look at it that way, that's the only change that really stands out to me as something that could be problematic.
Madam Clerk, has Bill 218 been already passed through the House?
No.
So if we wanted to comment on any item of concern, we could still do it?
That's correct. I don't know that you need to pick and choose which items you support. I think if council's going to take a stance, then they should just say they're either in support of or against Bill 218 and the proposed changes to the Municipal Act.
Would we do that with a notice of motion?
That's correct.
So if any council member would like to oppose this bill or in favor of it, maybe you can propose a notice of motion for our next meeting. Deputy Mayor?
I would propose a notice of motion on that to be against it, just because of that 6 week time frame. I think that makes it too short for staff to get everything done.
Okay, Madam Clerk, we'll prepare that notice of motion to come forward.
Yes, I will present it on November 25th.
Thank you. Councillor Barfoot, I do not want to seem like I'm ignoring you, but please, if you have any comments you want to make, just speak in the mic and tell me. Okay? So I'll move forward with our agenda. We're down to staff reports. I have a recommendation here that the proposal from WSP to complete the stage 2 archaeological assessment be accepted to be completed in spring 2021, and that the area proposed by WSP for the first mandatory meeting for public stakeholders be accepted, and further that WSP contact property owners to advise of the municipal class environmental assessment. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, second by Councillor Thompson. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, through you, your chair. I was just curious on the public meeting part of it. Would we know, or the public stakeholders be accepted for the meeting? When would that be? I didn't see the actual date. Do we know that, Cassie?
Brian's on the line to speak to that, Mr. Mayor. So if Brian Anderson can answer that question.
Go ahead, Brian.
No, there isn't yet a date set for that. That's something that we could provide direction to WSP on, but it can be held at any time now.
Okay, Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Do we, is there any other discussion on the motion before us? All in favor of the motion? Councillor Barfoot, are you in favor or opposed?
In favor.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, moving on our agenda, we're down to our next recommendation that the additional funds at an approximate cost of $17,000 for the rehabilitation of bridge S0001 be approved. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Colburn, second by Deputy Mayor Carlton. Any discussion on the motion before us? Councillor Colburn, were you asking a question? No. Okay. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion? It's carried. Councillor Colburn or Councillor Barfoot?
In favor.
Thank you. We're down to our next recommendation, that the committee of the whole hereby directs staff to circulate the notice of public meeting to be held at the December 9th, 2020 meeting of committee of the whole to consider renaming Highway 6 between Gray Road 17 and Elm Street to Burford Street. Someone to move to the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Pringle, second by Councillor Colburn. Who would like to speak to this? Cassie, go ahead.
No, I'm just letting you know that Brian is also on the line to speak to that as well.
Brian, go ahead, please.
So this is a request from the county that came from the Ministry of Health that Bruce County has that section of Highway 6 named as Burford Street, and we have it named as Highway 6. So they have asked us to consider renaming that. Now, we don't own the highway, and it's not a connecting link, and we don't provide maintenance to it, but they have made the request to our council to consider that renaming in order to streamline it for ambulance service and emergency services. So they can only have one name assigned per road regardless of which side of the road it's on. And they just would like this for consistency, as Bruce County's is located within their inside their development area, and they have more houses on that side of the road.
Thank you, Brian, for that explanation. Does council have any questions? Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, through you, your chair. Is this going to be the same can of worms with everybody in that area? They're going to be at an extra cost to get their addresses changed to Highway 6 or Burford Street? Are they going to be at that extra expense themselves then?
Cassie, you want to speak to that?
Yes, they would. there's less houses than when we talked about it in the Wilson Drive situation. But yes, they would have to pay for changing things such as licenses, mailing address on everything. I have heard of some townships providing municipal financial support in those situations. But before any decisions are made on that, I think we need to host the public meeting, and then council can make their decision.
Thanks, Cassie. Brian, any other comments before I ask for the vote?
We could have the County of Oak Grey attend to this as well, as similar to the Wilson Drive meeting, to help answer questions.
Okay. I see no other questions coming from council, so all in favor of the motion before us.
Well,
Brian,
can
Brian,
you
do you
just?
have a question?
Yeah, I think I know what we're voting on. I just want to be really sure. What are we voting on? In a
Just
vote in
to have a
favor.
just to have a public meeting so we can.
Good.
discuss.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, all in favor of the motion before us? It's carried. Okay, we're moving on our agenda. We're down to our next recommendation that the water bill relief request for 125 Sunset Boulevard be denied and no water meter testing be completed. Someone move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Colbert, second by Councillor Thompson. Brian, you want to speak to this? It was a great report you had in our agenda.
Thank you. This was a request from the resident. He claims that he was not at home during the time that the water was used, and feels that the water meter was defective. In reviewing our meter data located on the border, which is what we use to pay with South Bruce Peninsula for Oxenden, the numbers are very close in the extra usage over the period of time, and it very much looks like the flapper on the toilet is not sealing based on the testing that we did here. The resident is out of town and is only in on the weekends. In consultation with a local plumbing agency, they indicated that they have used to investigate similar leaks and thinks that this is rather on the low side if there was, but it certainly is a reasonable cost. Other than more testing and investing township money into it or issuing a refund of some sort, we would be heavily invested to prove this.
Thanks, Brian. I did notice in the report from a mechanical plumbing contractor indicated that he felt it was a faulty meter. Is there truth to that, or?
That is what his plumber has supplied to us, based on what we were able to check with our Oxenden meter. The difference would not indicate that that is the case. Our meter is calibrated with on Oxenden annually through Ontario Clean Water Agency.
Thanks, Brian. Does council have any questions? See no questions, I'll ask for the vote. All in favor of the motion before us? It is carried. Moving on for agenda. Madam Clerk, I'll read the recommendation first. The committee approved an amendment agreement to the site plan agreement number 199964 with Aaron and Sonia, and I'm having trouble with the last name.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Certainly can.
You missed the first line of that recommendation.
Well, I guess that's important too, isn't it? Sorry, I'll start again. The recommendation is that the committee approve a site plan security amount of $5,000 and that the committee approve an amendment agreement to site plan number 199964 with Aird and Sonia Snosier, owners for lands described as Concession 4, Part 10 Derby, and that bylaw 2020-127 be passed, authorized, execute of this agreement. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councillor Sullivan. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion?
In favor?
Thank you, Carol. It's approved. Moving on for agenda, we're down to the next recommendation of the Committee of the Whole hereby approves repealing and replacing bylaw 27, 2016, and that the draft off-road vehicle bylaw amend to this report be presented for enactment at the November 25th, 2020 council meeting. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, second by Councillor Pringle. Discussion on the motion before us. Deputy Mayor Carlton.
I forwarded some comments to the clerk earlier about some wording that I think needs to be changed. It's, as an example, it refers to straddles rather than straddled, which I think would be the correct wording. And some of the numbering, 2.6 is listed twice, which fixing that in here then will affect Schedule B on the fees bylaw. I do have a question about 2.6 in here though. The second 2.6, it says no person shall operate an off-road vehicle within the municipality during the period of 11 p.m. through to 7 a.m. Would that include, say, emergency vehicles that maybe were out of the roads at a certain time, or am I off track on that?
Cassie, go ahead.
It's just off-road vehicles. So like obviously if ITFD were to use their little RV thing to go rescue someone, that's different. But what you'll notice is that reconciles with our noise bylaw.
Thanks, Cassie. And Madam Clerk, I believe you have already noted the Deputy Mayor's comments about certain things. Okay. Does Council have any questions on the Councillor Colbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one item that I'm curious about is in the definition section that comes in the beginning. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who I should be directing my questions to. I guess to you, Mr. Mayor, but I've forgotten who has written this report. When one looks at other similar bylaws in other municipalities, one definition that's covered along with all of the rest of them in the beginning of a similar bylaw would be what we refer to as a roadway. And unless I'm mistaken, I note that ours does not include a definition of a roadway. And if I'm not mistaken, that is one of the issues with our former bylaw that created some confusion over the definition of a roadway. So if I can read to you the definition of roadway that's taken from a neighboring municipality's bylaw, it defines roadway as a bunch of things. I'm not going to read them all to you, but the last sentence under that definition of roadway says private roads and unopened road allowances are excluded. So I'm just wondering what the rationale is for staff having left off the definition of roadway, because as I say, in the former bylaw, that lack of wording was the difference between some folks looking at the bylaw and saying we're in violation of the Niagara Escarpment Plan, depending on one definition of roadway, and for others to say, no, we're not, because we define roadway in this way.
Thank you, Councillor Colbert, for that question. And not seeing the full brunt of the bylaw you're referring to from another source makes it a little bit difficult. But Madam Clerk, you prepared this report. Any comments?
Thank you. So, I think at this point I'll do a general review, and maybe that will help address some of the concerns specifically regarding roadways. So I did rely heavily on, other surrounding municipalities' bylaws in order to create this new bylaw. As Councillor Coburn has referenced, our former bylaw definitely lacked in some information when it came to enforcement. So specifically, there is no definition regarding a roadway. That is correct. There is, however, a definition regarding a highway. So that highway is included in 1.1 section of definitions of this bylaw. And the highway includes a common and public highway, street, avenue, parkway, driveway, square, place, bridge, viaduct, or trestle, any part of which is intended or used by the public. So I took that definition straight from the Highway Traffic Act. A lot of this has been taken directly from provincial legislation, so we know it is enforceable. That conversation regarding unopened road allowances and etc. came up at a management team meeting. And I'll invite the CAO to jump in here wherever she sees fit. But it was the opinion of our chief building official and bylaw enforcement officer that we keep the bylaw fairly general in a sense, so that we are not limiting ourselves when it comes to enforcement measures. If we find that a certain area or a certain unopened road allowance or private road, etc., is becoming problematic, then we add that section as a prohibited area. The way I've attempted to structure this bylaw is that if you are not on an open highway, being any township roadway or a designated trail route, you're not on an ATV. And that's what we've attempted to do here. Cassie, do you have any other comments?
Go ahead, Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Brittany. That's helpful. I guess I would respond to the rationale to keep our bylaws fairly general in nature. I wonder if that's why we have problems enforcing our bylaws. We are often told that they're not enforceable because they have no teeth. And I would argue that in order for a bylaw to have teeth, it has to be very specific. So I'll leave that. I did have another question regarding a different section, Mr. Mayor, if I can pose that question at this time.
Go ahead.
So I'm looking on page 3 under section 3, authorization. There is reference in this bylaw to a local ATV club, and I find that fairly, I would think that would be fairly unusual. Our bylaws are our bylaws. I understand that we have agreements with local ATV clubs and other clubs perhaps as well, but those are separate and apart from a bylaw that is meant to govern what we do as a council and how staff administers the bylaw. So I guess I'm looking for an explanation for the purpose around section 3 authorizations, specifically 3.1 and 3.2, that talks about an official partnership with a local agency. Again, when one reads bylaws of a similar nature in other municipalities, they do not reference clubs, recreational clubs, or other clubs in their bylaws. So I'm just wondering what the rationale is for including that here.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, you want to answer that, please?
So Cassie had her hand raised while we were speaking of the former topic. So maybe we can go to her first and then I'll respond to Councillor Coburn's comment.
Go ahead, Cassie.
So I just wanted to respond to Councillor Coburn's comment about our bylaw being too general. So what we didn't want to do is blanket label everything and say ATVs are not allowed on any unopened road allowance, because there are some unopened road allowance where ATVs make sense, right? And then we got into the discussion, well, what's an unopened road allowance? Is that an unmaintained one? Is an unmaintained one considered open? And definitions like that. So we kept the bylaw general so that we can specifically put in those areas that we do not want ATVs. So like Brittany said, if you know, we keep getting complaints about, and one that was brought up was the trail by McNabb Lake. If we keep on getting complaints about ATV users using that road allowance, we do maintain that for Grey Salvo. Is that unopened? Is it opened? So we wanted to keep it general so that if we get complaints, council can specifically say we want to prohibit that section and include it in here. we felt if we just blanket statemented on open road allowance, we could be getting ourselves into trouble the other way with ATV clubs, because there are some on open road allowances where ATVs make sense.
Good comment. Madam Clerk, you want to you want to answer Councillor Colbert's question.
Yes, thank you. So Section 3 has been worked into this bylaw to recognize the existing trail routes that currently reside within the township of Georgian Bluffs. Let me just give me 1 second here. I'm gonna look at our moving situation. Okay, so throughout this bylaw, we reference a recognized agency and a designated trail route. I have included this wording specifically to recognize the existing ATV trail route that has been designated through the South Bruce Peninsula ATV Club. Should any other organization wish to establish a trail, we have to first deem them a recognized agency and then designate the trail route as a designated trail route. Currently, and under this bylaw, if they are not under a designated trail route, which the only trail route that currently exists in the township is the South Bruce Peninsula ATV Club route, and you're not on an open highway, then you're not on an ATV. So that's the work, that's why I worked in Section 3, and I did that actually at the recommendation of a few other clerks that I had reached out to that have recently incorporated bylaws to this effect in their municipalities. As they were in a similar situation as us, they had recognized agencies within their township that had established trailways, and it was provided to them as a legal opinion that they should have this authorization included. And I do tend to agree to ensure that we are recognizing the appropriate areas within the township.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. For response, Deputy Mayor Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. Earlier, the clerk had sent out some questions for public question period, and one of those directly reflects on what we're talking about now. I'm wondering if we should bring that one forward and answer those questions now rather than do it again later.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you for bringing that up, Deputy Mayor. Once we get through council questions, I was going to move or request that we consider those questions now before we pass or approve of this bylaw. And I want to just clarify, this is our first draft of the bylaw. So if you feel strongly about a section or you feel strongly that there should be wording incorporated, then we can definitely take it back to the drawing table and manipulate it more. This is by no means the final draft.
And that's a good point, Madam Clerk. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Councillor Coburn, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did want to also thank staff for their work on this bylaw. I didn't want to be remiss in questioning sections and not offering my thanks for a job well done. As I've said before, it's been a long time coming. And so for one, I think all of council likely really appreciates the efforts and the work and the coordination that's gone into developing this new bylaw. I also wanted to say I think it's excellent that we have the appendix chart at the end that this is kind of a living document for a bylaw where we can add to the areas that we intend to prohibit for ATV use, and I thought that was that's really clever and really useful. So I did want to make sure I thanked you for this work.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Good comments. And I agree with everyone. So, Madam Clerk, do you want to do the public question period questions now? Is what you're saying?
Yes, I would like to bring them forward at this point, specifically one submission, because it does speak specifically to the ATV bylaw, so I don't want us to repeat this conversation. So
do you want to do just the one for the comments about ATVs and so on and leave the other one?
Correct, yes. I'll move forward with Ms. Ian Schneider's questions at this point.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
I do not have it in front of me, so please go ahead.
So these questions are the exact same as the ones that I had circulated to all of council earlier today. The first question, does highways under the jurisdiction of Georgian Bluffs in accordance with provincial legislation include unopened roads and road allowances? If there's any other questions about that, I think we've clarified that. The highways definition in this bylaw does specifically refer to public highways under the jurisdiction of Georgian Bluffs, which means they're limited to township roadways, no provincial highways, and no county roadways.
Okay, if there's no questions on that question, want to go over the next part?
Second question, is the rail trail the only trail route currently designated by an agreement of memorandum of understanding with a recognized agency? The answer to that question is yes. The reason I built that in specifically is so that staff and council have the ability to approve trailways before they are established within the township. So that way we have the ability to consult with applicable agencies, including the NEC, regarding what is and is not allowed on the proposed trailways. So currently, the only trail system that we recognize as ATV usable is that's outlined in the agreement with the South Bruce Peninsula ATV Club.
Thank you. If there's no questions on that question, we'll go on to our last question for the comment. Go ahead.
So the third question is 2.7 states that no person shall operate an off-road vehicle in such a way as to disrupt or destroy the natural environment. Can you speak to how areas that have already been damaged by off-road vehicle use will become prohibited areas and how damage will be repaired? So I think there's two portions of that. One, we will ensure that current trail routes are maintained as per our agreement with South Bruce Peninsula ATV Club. The only designated trail route in our municipality is maintained by that agency, and therefore they do minor maintenance as per our agreement. How areas become prohibited is also done by this bylaw. So you'll notice that Schedule A to this bylaw currently only speaks to I always forget the names of these trails, the Glen Holly
and Curly Harnden.
Thank you, Glen Holly and Curly Harnden trails. So those areas are prohibited upon enactment of this bylaw. And as for existing damage, unless the CEO has any comments, I would just recommend that people tell us about the damage, and therefore we can address it appropriately.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any questions on the question? Seeing none, now there's one other comment that you want to speak to, please.
Thank you. Okay, so she says, our last points. We don't know if this should be included in the bylaw, but strongly feel that should the development of a new trail or addition to an existing trail be considered, that there should be consultation with immediate community constituents. As well, we are assuming that the hierarchy of trail use described in the Recreation and Mass Trails Master Plan document will be used to determine appropriate trail use. And my comment to that is, as I've said a couple of times now, the only way ATVs are allowed on a trail is if it is a designated trail route, which has approval of council. So therefore, any proposed trailways have to come before council before they become trailways. Therefore, they're always considered in a public forum, and the community has opportunity to provide their input.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any questions on this other question from council? Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I was having a little trouble hearing all of that, but so I hope I'm not asking a question that's been answered, but you've made reference to officially designated trails as approved by council. Where is that list, or where do we access that? How do we know which ones are officially approved at this point? We know that the two side trails in the Gleason Lake area have been taken off. So where do we go to see which ones are currently approved?
Cassie, can you answer that? Or sorry, I'm looking right at Brittany. Sorry, Brittany.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Currently, and as is reflected in the bylaw, the only trail that is a designated trail route is that which is defined in the memorandum of understanding with the South Bruce ATV Club. That has been appended to your agenda, and it is only the existing rail trail, portions of the rail trail. So that's it at this point. If at any other time someone wants to create another trail route, they have to come to council in order to have that approved.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Carlton.
That brings to mind a question for me. Part of that rail trail goes through NEP property. So because that's a long-term existing use, does that sort of let it carry on through that property?
Kathy, go ahead.
So we've had many discussions of this at the staff level, and we have not gotten a clear answer from the NEC on that because for several reasons. One, a lot of former staff made the argument that the fact that trains used to run through that portion of the property actually created way more damage and contamination than ATV use would. So ATVs are currently using the existing portion that was already used by trains. And you know, the contamination level from that is quite significant. Two, we are unable to reroute that portion of the trail. It's not possible. And you know, you'd have to go onto private property and it's quite a large reroute. Three, we've also had conversations with NEC because it kind of is an existing use. They're not doing any enforcement there. And so because of that, at this time, we are leaving the rail trail in that portion as is.
Thank you. That's a good response. Thank you. If I see no other questions on this, I'll call a vote on the motion and then we'll go back to public question period.
Yeah, I would just like to be clear that, you know, other than Deputy Mayor's changes that she has noticed, you know, minor wording changes and numbering changes, that there's no substantial changes that council would like to see made to this bylaw. If you are happy with the way that it is written now, then we can get it enacted as soon as possible and, you know, finally put the ATV issue to bed.
Kathy, go ahead.
And I just really want to emphasize that this is a fluid document, okay? We know that, you know, as this gets passed, you're going to get more concerns about from ratepayers about specific areas. And, you know, we are always able to amend this. But this is our starting point to fix the problems that we currently know exist. And it is a fluid document.
Thank you. And that's good. Seeing no.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Carol.
Okay, this is more curiosity than anything. I noticed the hours are what, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Not, they shouldn't be out, but because this trail goes through a residential area, how are our bylaws? Are bylaws strong enough? Who's going to charge them? Tim doesn't work that late at night. OPP? And is there any sense in laying charges, such as speeding?
Thanks, Carol. Madam Clerk, you want to answer that?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Barfoot. This bylaw does delegate authority to municipal bylaw officials as well as OPP, as well as kind of any officer of the law. So the OPP would have the authority to ticket them either on weekends or between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. As well, there is a clause in this bylaw that does not permit ATV use in settlement areas. So I'm hopeful that that does not become a problem, but should it, other people other than Tim do have the authority to enforce this and remit fines.
Thank you.
Okay, I have another follow-up question on that too.
Go ahead, Carol.
Brittany, the rail trail goes through the village of Shallow Lake, and we keep referring to off-road vehicles, but what about snowmobiles?
Snowmobiles don't meet the definition of an off-road vehicle. Off-road vehicles have wheels, not skis.
Interesting.
And that's per the Highway Traffic Act, not me.
Carol, hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. So just before I ask for the vote on this motion, Brittany, it's the first start of our bylaw, and by passing this motion, council is saying to bring back the proper bylaw.
That's correct, yes.
Okay? All in favor of the motion before us? It is carried.
Councillor Barfoot? Are you for or against the motion?
I'm for.
Thank you. Okay, we're down to public question period, and we have one more question, I believe, sent in by Cal. And Brittany, you want to read it, please?
Thank you. Yes, this question was submitted by Calvin Comfort. I understand that consideration is being given to the rebuilding/repaving of Presqu'île Road from McIntosh northerly to Railroad 1. If this necessary work is to be undertaken in 2021, consideration should be given to paving the easterly 100 yards of Bayview Lane, which would eliminate future periodic grading of the unpaved section of this road, and determine whether grants are available to bring natural gas to the general area and water to unserviced portions of Presqu'île Road, as it would be cost effective to add infrastructure at the same time the road is being rebuilt.
Good question. Cassie, go ahead.
So in response to that question, I did take a drive down Presqu'île Road today, and it is in need of resurfacing. That will be a discussion when we hire our Director of Operations to determine if that will be a capital project in 2021. Because on that road, we also need to consider erosion and shore road protection and those kind of measures. So it might not be as easy as resurfacing it. We may need to fully engineer it to make sure that it doesn't keep sliding into the bay. As for Cal's comments in relation to natural gas, the township has really no influence on where natural gas goes. That's up to the service providers in the area. I would agree that ideally to install that kind of service should take place before a road is reconstructed. But again, we really have no influence on that decision. As for a water line extension, as per our policies, we would have to circulate in that area affected to see if this is something they want. A number of those houses are, and maybe all of them, I'm not that familiar with the area, have shore wells. And you can see where some of the shore wells are very newly constructed. So it'd be interesting, to put a survey out and see if that's something that residents in that area are interested in. He did reference the one little section, Bayview Street or Bay Street. I did look at it today, and really it doesn't make sense that it's not paved. It's the smallest little street, and it's paved about a quarter of the way down, and then the bottom half is not paved. So my recommendation would be, if any work is done in that area, that section does get paved as well.
Thank you. When Harold Sutherland Construction actually redone McIntosh Street, needs some extra asphalt, and that's why that first portion was paved the way it was. And next thing, yeah. So, Councillor Sutherland.
Thank you through your chair, and in response to Cassie's or our CAO's response, I would also say too, knowing that I do live there or near there, and I travel that portion of road, there is a lot of spots where you can see people have done work to get to their shorelines or stuff like that. So maybe if we were going to reconstruct the road, and maybe ask them if they are looking to upgrade or fix their existing lines, that they do it prior to the construction and repaving, because then we end up recutting the asphalt, and that makes for a terrible mess down the road. I know myself personally, I have a line that runs down there, and I would want to redo that as well before. So I would like to know that, and I think others would too. Thank you.
Good comments, Councillor Sutherland, and this is a topic I believe that our new Director of Operations will be discussing with his forces and bringing back something to council. So it's a good question anyway from Cal. So Madam Clerk, do we have any other questions on the public question period?
No.
Okay, it's great to see those questions coming through from the public too. We're down to unfinished business. We have none. No new business, so we're down to our closed session. A recommendation here that the committee of the whole move into closed session at 6:35. 6:35. For the interim CEO and clerk to discuss personal matters about an indefinable individual. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Barfoot, second by Councillor Thompson. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? See none? All in favor of the motion? Councillor Barfoot, are you in favor or opposed?
In favor?
Thank you. Motion was carried. We're now in closed session.
Oh, Ryan came back.
He's to head out the door.
Yeah, he is.
Office.
Two more.
We got enter. Oh, thank get out. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. We are now in open session. We only been in camera to discuss what we may discuss, nothing more. I need one more motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Thompson, second by Deputy Mayor Carlton. All in favor of adjournment? And Councillor Barfoot is back?
Yep.
Okay, we are now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody.